Hello, and welcome to the JCC of Metro Detroit's 70th Annual Jewish Book Fair. My name is Suzanne Simon. I'm a member of the steering committee and book club night co-chair. It is my pleasure to welcome you on this Sunday afternoon to the History of Stand-Up by Wayne Federman. This is the 70th Annual Detroit Jewish Book Fair, and we are celebrating an entire year of book and story programming. Join us as we honor the world's first Jewish book fair, highlighting diverse authors, curating new Jewish writing, and promoting the global art of Jewish storytelling. Our festival week, which continues through Sunday, November 14th, is just the beginning. Be sure to come back all year for exceptional opportunities to engage with the best of Jewish books and authors. To see our full schedule, watch events that you may have missed or find online, where you can find the history of stand-up from Mark Twain to Dave Chappelle and plenty of other hand-selected Jewish books and gifts. Visit our website that you see here, culturalarts.jccdet.org/bookfair. If you enjoy this event and other book fair events, please consider becoming a patron or donating to the book fair. You can do either or both at our website, culturalarts.jccdet.org/bookfair. We are relying on community support to make this annual event possible, so thank you in advance for becoming part of the family. The book fair team would like to thank the following for their support. Day sponsors, Andy and Larry Wolf, co-sponsor Adat Shalom Synagogue. I also want to extend our deepest gratitude to the whole book fair committee. Your dedication, innovation, commitment, and hard work have made all of this possible. We have an entertaining event for you this afternoon, and we want you to be part of it. You can ask questions and offer comments in the YouTube comment section below or by texting the number in the corner of your screen. Our speakers have a great discussion prepared, and they will take as many of your questions as they can. While you're here at our YouTube channel, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the reminder bell. That way, you'll never miss any of the exciting events. Our focus of today's event is the history of stand-up from Mark Twain to Dave Chappelle. We have with us the author of the book, Wayne Federman, along with Big Al Muskovitz, who will moderate the discussion. The history of stand-up chronicles the evolution of this American art form, from its earliest pre-vaudeville practitioners like Artemus Ward and Mark Twain to the present-day comedians of HBO and Netflix. Comedian veteran Wayne Federman guides us on this fascinating journey of humans standing on stage alone trying to get laughs. Wayne Federman is an American comedian, author, actor, writer, comedy historian, podcaster, and musician. He's noted for stand-up comedy appearance in clubs, theaters, and television. In the spring of 2017, Federman began his tenure as an adjunct professor at the University of Southern California, teaching stand-up performance and history for the USC School of Dramatic Arts. Our moderator, Big Al Muskovitz, worked as a sidekick, writer, impersonator, character voice talent, and producer for radio personality Dick Burton for 18 years until Burton's retirement in March of 2010. Today, Al wears many creative hats, including contributing writer to the Detroit Jewish News. Please join me in welcoming Wayne Federman and Big Al Muskovitz.
Thank you.
Wayne, hello.
Thank you. All I can say is that was a nice introduction, Suzanne. My biggest Jewish credit being on Curb Your Enthusiasm. Somehow you forgot of all the things. That's my claim to fame in the Jewish community. Everyone loves Larry David.
That finally got you credibility. Finally. Right?
So all right. Well, I didn't know you were going to start with an insult, but yeah, let's start that way.
In the Jewish community is what I mean. For the Jewish community. That's what I meant. But listening, believe me, to your introduction, it does nothing for my self-esteem. I wrote on my Facebook page, yes, he's had the career I've always wanted. So it's really a pleasure to see you, Wayne. And I know people are going to enjoy hearing from you. I actually did something that I actually bought the book. I could have gotten a book from the Jewish Book Fair folks, but I ordered it. So I wanted you to know I purchased it myself. So you can add that.
I appreciate it.
That's all right. And I actually did something that I didn't do when I was in college, and that is I read it, and I actually highlighted it because it's 130 pages of incredibly what you packed in for the history of stand-up. I mean, you could have made it 1,000 pages, but you've really made it understandable and condensed and took everybody on a ride through history of stand-up in a really comfortable way to sit down and read about it.
Love it.
Yeah. So,
well, that was our lecture. Thanks for tuning in, guys.
For tuning in. Yes.
Really fun.
Very good. Yeah. I mean, you start and what's, I know you start with from the beginning, you start with the forefathers of comedy, and even the local comedy castle owner here, Mark Ridley, who's been the owner of the famous Comedy Castle here for years. When I mentioned the name Artemus Ward, he even had to look it up. So why don't you,
well, we mentioned the Comedy Castle the Comedy Castle was part of I'm going to jump in right there because that's a famous club there in Detroit, was part of what was known as the 1980s, early 90s comedy boom, where these comedy clubs, which was a new idea, only started in the 60s in New York at a place called the Improv, where just the idea, Alan, the idea of multiple comedians on one show just was like, no one could even imagine that would be appealing to anyone. They would just think, oh, you want a comedian, you wanted a singer, a juggler. Like, I don't know if anyone's listening old enough to remember the Ed Sullivan Show, but that's like kind of variety that came out of vaudeville and all of that. So this was a brand new innovation that's still going on. Last night I did a spot at the Improv here in Los Angeles. So it's like the idea that's the whole show, just comedians, was new. And Mark Ridley's Comedy Castle there was one of the first ones. I think it opened in the 80s, if I'm not mistaken. Is that true?
Yeah, I'm forgetting.
What year? Do you know what year, Alan?
I don't. I can Google it.
No, of course.
Right. But I don't know. A long time, but it's had a successful run. And I talked to Mark today, as a matter of fact, and it's still going gangbusters. And he's a great.
And by gangbusters, you mean like an old radio show from the 40s?
Most of my references are old. You'll understand. Okay. I was the only one in fourth grade saying, I'm not going out to play baseball. My Rincon is on. I need to watch it.
Oh, I see. I love it.
That's what I'm about. But what I'm fascinated by you is that you actually, listen, you've been in a stand-up comic for 35 years at least, right? And yet you started your interest in the history of comedy or stand-up back when you were a teenager, I read. So you had an interest before that became even your career, really.
Right. Well, as soon as I found out, Alan, that stand-up comedy was a profession, I wanted to do it. And that wasn't really until like junior high school and high school, which is weird because I listened to Bill Cosby, excuse the expression, records when I was a kid. But then I was like, oh, this is a job you can actually do. So I was fascinated. And then how I got into it was through, believe it or not, I became a ventriloquist in high school. And there was an album, Lessons in Ventriloquism, it was called, by Edgar Bergen and his two dummies, Charlie McCarthy and Mortimer Snerd. And I had never heard of it. I barely heard of this guy. Listen to his album, but here's the reason I'm talking to you right now. There we go, 79, Ronnie, I love it. We're talking about the Comedy Castle. So one of the earliest stand-up clubs. So basically, I'd listened to this Bergen record and they had old radio recordings on it. So I was like, who are these people? I knew comics from the Tonight Show and stuff like that. So that got me into Jack Benny. That got me into Fred Allen. That got me into, obviously Fibber McGee, all of those old radio shows, gangbusters, like you just mentioned. And so even as a kid, in like the 70s, when everyone was listening to George Carlin or Pryor or Cheech and Chong, I'm listening to old Fred Allen shows. So I was even a nerd before I even knew what the word nerd meant. Yeah. So that's how I kind of got into it. And that's why this book exists, is because and now I've gone further back, because anyway, vaudeville, even pre-vaudeville. I'm really into pre-vaudeville now.
Yeah, I can relate to that because, I've always had a fascination with the comedians that, yes, my contemporaries would never have even considered listening to, the Jack Bennys and so on and so forth. And I was enamored by that and loved it. You mentioned Bill Cosby, forgive me, but that was the first comedy album I actually would entertain.
Which one was? Which one?
The one with him on the go-kart.
That's Wonderfulness, it's called. Yeah.
I think that's the one where he did the thing on tonsils, maybe getting his tonsils out and ice cream, whatever it was. But I used to memorize those by heart, and that's where my fascination started, was really with
Bill Cosby is a very important person in the history of stand-up. Unfortunately, his private life is reprehensible, but what he did comedically was phenomenal, especially coming on the heels of a guy, and we're kind of jumping all over the place here, of a guy named Dick Gregory, who was the first African-American comedian to play in like a headline a white nightclub. Like most white nightclubs, they might have a black singer or maybe Sammy Davis. What was the name of it? Oh, the Will Maston Trio. And so they would have those guys play. But Dick Gregory in 1961, which is, if I'm not mistaken, 10 years after the JCC book fair first started in 1951.
Good one.
He played the Playboy Club in Chicago, not too far from Detroit. And that opened the door for a lot of comedians. And 2 years later, Bill Cosby out of Philly hits it big. So, had a string of Grammy-winning albums, Wonderfulness. I started to my brother Russell, who I slept with, Why Is There Air? And the debut one was incredible. It was called Bill Cosby is a Very Funny Fellow, Right? Was the name of that. I don't know if anyone there. I'm looking at the comments. No one knows any of this stuff. Maybe these are too old references, Bill Cosby.
Well, just to get a little older, just for a second, because you mentioned the forefathers of comedy. You said
forefathers. There's four forefathers.
Four forefathers.
Yeah.
The Artemus Ward, Mark Twain, Burt Williams, Will Rogers, and Burt Williams, African-American black comedian who you mentioned as one of the forefathers, have no idea. And I thought that was rather fascinating that
you don't know that song, Nobody? You don't know that song?
I probably would know the song, but I wasn't familiar as far as stand-up is concerned with it.
Yeah, well, he did all of those guys. Yeah. Everyone I'm saying did other things as well, including the vaudeville comics. I mean, don't forget Jack Benny, who's from your neck of the woods. He's from Chicago, Wisconsin, I think. Wait a minute. He's from Waukegan. That's Illinois, right? Waukegan?
I don't know.
Oh, okay. Alan, come on.
I'm
waiting for Ronnie Leibovitz.
I don't get out.
So anyway, his name was Benjamin Kablewski.
Right.
He comes out of there. And then, so I was basically saying there's a lot of comedians that came out of the Midwest, Jewish, and changed their name. That everyone was into assimilation back then.
Right. And I was thinking when I read about
Thank you, Naomi Levine, helping me out. I love it.
Are you getting those in your comments section?
Yes.
Because I'm not seeing the comments.
Okay, Alan, do you see where it says private chat?
Yes.
Click right next to it. It should say comments. Guys, I know this is fascinating for everyone.
I thought they would automatically pop up, but now I see them.
No, you see them now?
I see it now. Yes. And Ronnie Leibovitz just
we got it. I'm way ahead of you.
Thank you very much.
Ronnie's
Thank
helping
you for
me
the
out.
technical help. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
The folks, you basically say, over the history of comedy, it's if you're standing there and you're telling a joke, you're a stand-up comic.
Yeah, can we put up slide number 2, please? Slide number 2. And I want to talk just briefly about, that's, of course, Joan Rivers from Larchmont, New York.
Right.
And I want to talk about 3 things just to think about stand-up, because everyone has a favorite comedian. Anyone listening, I know we have at least 2 people listening, Ronnie and Naomi. There's 3 things I want you to think. 1, the definition, which is what you just talked about, Alan, right? Which is what? standing alone on stage with the expectation of producing laughs from the audience. That's stand-up comedy. You can do it with long-form stories. You can tell jokes like Henny Youngman or Rodney Dangerfield or Dimitri Martin, maybe somebody. I'm trying to get everyone's thing. And then, but this is the most important thing, is number 2, I feel, is the most important, is that stand-up comedy is extremely generational art form. It has like a sell-by date. It's like when you get milk and it goes bad, because what happens is the culture changes. What's acceptable to use, language to use on stage changes. Certain terminology that I used to be able to say on stage, you can't say anymore. Subject matters are like, oh, they're in and now they're taboo. Like all of that changes. Plus the culture changes. Just like, for example, I was at the club last night and people are doing jokes about vaping or Vax cards. Like people aren't even 10 years ago, 2 years ago, people wouldn't know what you're talking about. So let alone when you're doing jokes from the 30s and you're making references to Cardinal Cook or something like that, or you're in the 50s and you're doing Adlai Stevenson jokes. They're not going to, Alan, they're not going to. So just remember, a lot of people are like, oh, these older comedians, they're just not funny. Their comedy doesn't stand up. That it doesn't have to stand the test of time. That's not what stand-up is. Stand-up is for people right now. And the people right now are enjoying the stand-ups of today. And the people in the past enjoyed people like Joan Rivers. And the third thing I want to talk about, I'm reading it right off there, technology. I hope I spelled that correctly. Naomi, I think I got it, is stand-ups adapt to new technology. You see she's got a microphone in front of her. That was a huge innovation. But anything, recorded sound, silent movies, well, not silent movies, talking movies, and then obviously radio. We were just talking about Jack Benny. Then long playing records. We're going to talk about those guys in a minute. That changed, huge change with Mort Saul and a guy also out of Chicago by the name of Bob Newhart and Shelley Berman and all of those dudes. I hope people know what I'm talking about. And then, so that changed a lot. And then obviously television with Milton Berle, and then the Ed Sullivan Show, and especially late night, Jack Parr, Steve Allen, and of course the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. That was a big thing for young comedians to break on that show. And then in 2006, just 15 years ago, the internet, and there was a comedian named Bo Burnham who performed in his bedroom in Hamilton, Massachusetts. He changes everything. And suddenly you have a comedian interviewing the president of the United States on his podcast. You have podcasts. Guess what's happening right now? What are we doing? We're streaming this live on YouTube, right? This is part of the newest technology. So comedians always adapt, to new technologies.
Well, you were
that's I wanted to get those 3 things out of the way. Yeah. I know it sounds like I'm teaching a class, but I hope
but you do teach a class, and
I know it's not great.
It's you had mentioned about presidents, and I was trying to look. Was it who did the joke about a president decades and decades ago? Was it Fred Allen or? I'm trying to look at my notes to find it because I wanted to ask you specifically about that. It was like one of the first comedians to do a joke about a president in front of a president.
Oh, of course. Well, that's one of the 4 forefathers.
Oh, was
that's
it?
A gentleman named Will Rogers.
Will Rogers, pardon me.
And he, who unfortunately passed away in 1935, but he is very important if you're interested at all in the history of stand-up and the history of the United States or anything like that, because he was the one who really popularized doing political material on stage. So if you think of Jon Stewart doing The Daily Show, or Stephen Colbert, or Trevor Noah, or John Oliver, or Samantha Bee, or any of those people, Dennis Miller, Mort Saul, all of those people do political jokes. You're like, where did this come from? All comes from Will Rogers, who was born, believe it or not, in Oklahoma wasn't even a state at that time. It was Indian Territory. and he's part Cherokee. So he's just a fascinating, unbelievable story, Will Rogers' success, because he started out as a roper, and he would bring a horse on stage and then rope it, and then suddenly just throwing little asides out to the audience. Then eventually did more and more talking, less and less roping. I was like, this is great. And then finally he became this incredible. He was in movies. He had a newspaper column, a daily column. He was on radio and toured the country as a stand-up. So he is one of the, I could do an hour, I could do 5 hours on Will Rogers alone, but I think he's an important person to know about if you're interested in this. I assume people are clicking off right now.
Well, no, when I looked up Artemus Ward and I saw he was born in 1834 and I was associating the word stand-up comedian with him, I visualized him doing 10 minutes on Abe Lincoln or something somewhere.
Lincoln was it's interesting you bring him up, Alan. Very good. Lincoln was a huge fan of Ward's, and actually we used to read from his book late at night to sort of relax, because Ward started out like all these comedians as something else. Remember, we were just talking about Will Rogers. He was a roper, and then obviously Burt Williams worked in a medicine show, and Mark Twain was an author, and Will Rogers. So all of these people start out as something else, and then kind of develop stand-up comedy. And Artemus Ward was a newspaper writer, so he was an author and then brought it to the stage.
And you mentioned the expiration date, perhaps, on some stand-up comedians, but really, there are those who make it through to the different generations.
Very rare. Maybe George Carlin. I see. Right. Notice. Yeah. Who do you think? Well, let's open it up to the people.
Well, I'm thinking that there's.
Give me an example.
Well, let's say there's old comedians who get newer just by simply what they like. A Don Rickles, Jimmy Kimmel was a huge fan of. They were very close with Don Rickles. So there's a young guy who loved what Rickles did. So what I'm saying is they kind of transcended into other generations, who liked that kind of humor, but not necessarily modern or changed humor, if you will.
Right. No, there was a number. Joan Rivers was like that. I'm not saying a comedian can only be popular for a short amount of time. I'm sorry if I said that wrong. I apologize. No. I'm saying that comedians, if you take their act and move it to today, it sometimes won't translate as well.
Doesn't hold up. Doesn't have
Yeah. And that's not a reflection on the comedian. That's a reflection on the jargon, the way people speak. Like, let me give you a perfect example. There was a guy named Henny Youngman, and one of his jokes, it was a mother-in-law joke, was, I just got back from a pleasure trip. I took my mother-in-law to the airport. Okay, so that's the joke. And it's a pretty good joke. But today, if you do that joke, nobody knows the expression pleasure trip. But it's just, so already people are going to be like, what is he? It's already off. You're not going to be able to get a laugh at that joke. And because the jargon, it's interesting that people still take business trips, but not pleasure trips. May
I share one very quick Henny Youngman story?
No, you can't. Go ahead.
He came into town years ago, and a friend of mine, he was coming in for a function, asked if I would go with him to pick up Henny Youngman at the airport. And he was in his 90s, sharp as a tack, although he was in a wheelchair at the time. He couldn't walk too well, but he was still just sharp, voice sharp, everything. And there we are in the corridor. This was back when you could get into the corridors of if you weren't flying, you could go meet somebody at the gate. And Henny Youngman, actually, this is one of the highlights of my life, hands me his violin and says, "Would you mind holding this while I go into the bathroom?"
Wow.
I'm glad he didn't ask me to hold anything else while he went to the bathroom, but I held his violin outside, and I thought I could run away with Henny Youngman's violin. But that was my personal up-close story of Henny Youngman. But I just thought, I don't know, in your next book, if you need an extra story, there you go.
Okay. All right. Let me make a note about it.
Make a note.
Somebody held his violin once. Okay.
Yes. While he was in the bathroom at Metro Airport.
While he was in the bathroom. I got it.
That was a highlight for me. So yeah, this evolution of what's going on in stand-up today, what I was fascinated about as well is the monetization of it is amazing through technology.
Give me an example of that.
Well, just, where people are putting their stuff online, or, whatever they can monetize online or through podcasting. Of course, you have a podcast on this very subject, but it seems that there's so many outlets now that can take a stand-up and not necessarily be in person, but monetize their careers through the internet, through online, through Twitter, through a variety of different
Right.
different ways.
Yeah.
And how has that affected, the type of stand-up, the kind of stand-up that we see today? Does it affect who we are seeing and what they're doing, the technology itself?
Of course.
Yeah.
Like people, it's yeah. I mean, people who are adept at putting up clips on TikTok or YouTube or Twitter, or just doing Twitter jokes, can get a following. And some of the older comedians are like, who've been doing the clubs for years, are like, I don't even know how to start with this.
Right.
And so, yeah, this is a perfect example of like how technology changes not only the comedians, but how they make a living, and how they, I hate to say it, they call it branding themselves. They have to brand themselves. So,
Right.
yeah.
You talk about the Friars Club, which I think a lot of folks are familiar with, of our generation.
Maybe you don't know.
You don't know, but I think of that as the kind of mecca of Jewish comedians, or comedians in general. You write to some extent to a little bit about the Friars Club, and they actually went on tour. Some of the comedians that were associated with the Friars Club, some of those stand-up acts.
Right. Yeah. This goes back. I mean, this was, again, the Friars Club was a theatrical organization. It also had people that were on Broadway. It wasn't just comedians back then. And we're talking about in the teens and 20s. And again, back to your Will Rogers performing in front of Woodrow Wilson, that was the Friars Club would stage this huge benefit that toured the United States with like comedians, and there was a incredible singer, dancer. He was also wrote plays named George M. Cohan, who wrote Yankee Doodle Dandy and all of those, great songs. He would tour with them. And so when they stopped in in Baltimore, Woodrow Wilson came to the show, and Will Rogers did his stand-up for him. Can we let's throw up a picture of Will Rogers just so people know what he looks like. That's number 6. And then, yeah. So you can see he was from it's interesting. He's Cherokee, but he's playing a cowboy.
Yeah, that was a interesting fact that I had no idea about, the Native American connection. But somebody's asking, and again, there's you talk about stand-up, talk about comedy, but Jamie was asking what the difference is in skill sets between comedians and comic actors, if you will.
Great question. A comic actor is someone who reacts within the scene of a narrative play. So you're reacting to somebody else. Like, Will Ferrell is a great example of someone today. So they're in a scene. They're not. A stand-up comedian is speaking directly to the audience. In a sense, the audience is their acting partner. So somebody once said, Dana Gould was the comedian. I don't know. He said that stand-up is a conversation, but only one person is talking. But it is important. The audience interaction is everything. That changes with every show. So it's a very interactive art form. That's why I don't speak too much about comedy teams, because in a way they're sort of doing like a little play between each other. Like if you think of Who's on First, they're not talking to the audience. They're like, who's on first? I don't know. That's the man's name. Yes. Well, tell me who's on first. I'm telling you. Why are you asking me who's on first? I'm telling you who's on first. So they're interacting, and the comedy comes from the conflict between those two people. But so in a way, that's what a comedy is, closer to a comedic actor than a straight stand-up.
And it's always
Great question.
And tied into the acting part of it, you've always, many times they say, and I don't know if it's necessarily attributed.
Oh, wait, I'm reading Ronnie. Seinfeld's one said comedians know how to be themselves. Comedic actors always being anybody but themselves. Oh, very good. Seinfeld is a huge, I mean, besides being Jewish, just an incredible success story. Probably has made more money from stand-up and his show than anyone who's ever done comedy. And so he's just a genius guy. I love to hear him talk about it.
Somebody was asking about this name caught my attention because Dick Purton, who I worked for many years here in Detroit on the radio, was a huge fan of Dennis Wolfberg.
Yes,
Wolfberg. Who we lost way before his time. But they were asking any stories or comments about Dennis Wolfberg.
Well, Dennis Wolfberg was a school teacher. I used to do sets with him.
Oh, that was from the JCC of Metro Detroit, somebody asked.
Yeah. Congratulations on your 70th anniversary of the book fair. I'd like to know how long the JCC of Metro Detroit has been around, how many years before 1951 when you didn't bother with books. That's what I want to know. But Dennis he had a kind of a bug-eyed guy. He was so crazy, played the guitar, and I loved him. I went to his house, actually went to a number of Seders at his house, believe it or not, before he passed away.
Wow.
And his wife has since remarried. It's just a lovely guy. I don't know how I can't really do any jokes good, but there's stuff on YouTube. I mean, I did television shows with him. He was just he when he got a crowd going, it was ridiculous. I don't know if anyone remembers. It was like he just really slay a room. Very strong 80s comedy club era comedian. This is something else I want to talk about. The different eras. So remember we were talking about Mark Ridley in 1979, January opens up the Comedy Castle. Now we have a generation of comedians who come up that way. Before them, there was coffee houses. Before them, there was nightclubs. Before them, vaudeville. So it's like everyone's in a different era. And it's really, that's how I kind of define comedians. But Dennis Wolfberg was definitely a comedy club comic that was incredible.
Well, I just thought of someone, and I know we're bouncing around, but that's how my brain works. Shelley Berman. You mentioned Shelley Berman.
Yes, I did.
Who you mentioned as kind of one of the stand-ups. Also did one of the, I think you said he was doing kind of the conversational phone humor type things.
In a way, yeah, he is like he's sort of a mix of a stand-up and like sketch actor.
Right. And what I find fascinating, and there's a connection to you in 6 Degrees of Separation, is Shelley Berman ended up playing Larry David's father on Curb Your Enthusiasm. I find absolutely wonderful that this guy who has this history of comedy and is brilliant, and probably when they saw him playing the father on Curb Your Enthusiasm, they had no idea who this man is. And so I find that fascinating that he transcended his original style and ended up on Curb Your Enthusiasm of all things.
Right. Hold on. I want to pull up. I'm going to get the number for this. Guys, I'm really having trouble with this. Okay. Can you pull up we're doing this by numbers, number 26, because I want to talk about that record. And then somebody else mentioned the telephone. We're getting some great questions, guys. Okay. So in the late 50s, early 60s, these record albums hit and are huge. The one on the bottom left is Shelley Berman. As you can see, he's talking on the telephone. This is also a technique that Bob Newhart did. Wasn't created by either one of those guys. We'll get to that in a second. But what's important about these records was Shelley Berman's was a gold album. Went gold. That means 500,000 copies. And won the Grammy Award for Best Spoken Word Comedy. Like he's the first stand-up to win that. So he's really important. Mort Saul's album came before that, recently passed away. But what's really important to me was the nightclub comedians at the time that were playing places like the Copacabana. They were playing the Fontainebleau in Miami Beach. They were playing the Sands Hotel out in Las Vegas. They were playing Atlantic City, the big resorts. There was they were like, who are these young comedians with these albums? Like, what? I'm not going to, like, Alan King literally said, why should I put my act on an album that someone could buy for $2.98 when I'm making $18,000 a week in Las Vegas? So there was a generational divide. This is, Alan, this is the same thing that's happening right now. Where older comedians like, I don't want to put my act on Twitter. I don't even know how to do it. And young comedians are like, you don't? Well, good, because I can, and I'm going to get a following this way. So again, this story keeps repeating itself over and over again. So I know there was a question about the phone. I'm going to pull up another one. What was the, before we get to Gilda Radner?
Yeah, because I want to ask
the effect of the iPhone. Oh my God, this is a great question. Okay. But before this, I just want to do a little thing just to go back to number 11. In 1913, which is now over 100 years ago, 107 years ago, this was a guy, comedian from England, who did, if you look at the bottom, it says the English Hebrew comedians. At the time, this is during melting pot comedy. It was all very ethnic. And so he did this Cohen on the telephone, which was a Jewish guy trying to talk to his landlord on this new invention called a telephone. And so got great. What's great about using a telephone is the audience fills in the comedy partner. They fill in what the other person is saying. So it's really, it was a million selling record. The first huge comedy selling record, 1913. But can we go back one more slide to 10 and talk a little about stand-up comedians? These guys weren't stand-ups. They were a famous comedy team called the Marx Brothers. But as before, like I said, this was the ethnic era of stand-up. So Groucho was based on a German character. Harpo, even though he's in black and white, but that was a fright wig. That was like a red wig, like an Irish character based on a guy he created called Patsy Brannigan. And then, of course, Chico is full Italian, right, Alan?
Absolutely.
So these were all based on ethnic stereotypes. That's what comedy was during the pre-vaudeville and into vaudeville, but it all changed in vaudeville. We'll get to that story in a second, but I want to jump ahead with this great question here. Before we get to Gilda Radner, why can't I scroll up? Oh, I see. What effect did the iPhone and its ability to record? What about the so-called Twitter? Oh, this is, come on. All right, those are two huge questions. Well, the iPhone, there's a whole generation of comedians now that are called front-facing comedians that basically flip their phone, or you flip the camera around on the phone and just record themselves right here and put up videos. And a couple of them, Ziwe Fumaga, I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. She has a show now. She did it. She had a show that she did on Instagram, is now on Showtime. And then Sarah Cooper obviously did these front-facing comedian, did her lip sync of President Trump. I don't know if you saw any of those. Yeah. She became famous. She has a show on she has a CBS deal right now and did a special for HBO. So the iPhone, the ability to create content right in front of your face, huge. I'm wondering what Bob Newhart would have done with that, back in 1960 when he was trying to break through.
You know what I find? Okay. If I could throw out a thing about the phone and its use of comedy, is that I marvel at the amount of, and maybe I'm going to sound like an old man here, but the amount of stuff that I see being recorded on iPhones by people who are trying to be funny, but the level of humor I don't get, but the followings are amazing, is that it seems like the waters have been muddied with so many people trying to get your attention. And to me, there's a big distinction between what is really good and what is really bad. And there seems to be a lot of really bad stuff out there.
Well, of course, there's always, yes, I agree with you. There's a lot of really bad stuff, but I like the fact that somebody who's talented can break through and not have to worry about the booker from the Tonight Show or the booker for Netflix to give them their own special. They can do their own special and put it up on YouTube. I have a friend of mine who put up a special. His name's Sam Morrell. It has over 4 million views. It's incredible. Free on YouTube. Because he couldn't get Netflix to say yes. So I agree with you. There's a lot of, but there's always been. I mean, come on.
There's just more opportunity.
See my act in 1991. Okay. let's cut to this because Lauren and the MC wants to know about the Twitter mobs and Vaughn Meter. God, these are good questions. Jews, I love it.
That was one of my favorite albums. The first
so about cancel culture and Dave Chappelle. Well, I don't really have an answer for that. We can what is going on here? Yeah. We can talk about Dave Chappelle. That's the next to the last slide. I don't know if I don't know the number. I can't pull it up right now. But he's very controversial right now, and we're going to figure it out. I mean, my feeling is that comedians, like I'm working on a documentary of George Carlin right now for HBO, co-producing, not producing, not that big. And what Carlin said was that it was the job of the comedian, and I don't know if I agree with this, to find out what the line is, the acceptable line, and then go over the line. So I was like, I've never done that at my act. I'm a very safe. You can go back to me. You don't have to keep showing Chappelle. But so I thought that was interesting. I don't know. We're in the middle of it. I mean, there's never been like more like the internet, like you were talking about, Alan, has the ability to talk back against things you find inappropriate has never been stronger. And I don't know how it's all going to shake out. My feeling is this is a market situation where some companies are going to get nervous because they want that. But there's other ways you can market your material. So the market will work it out. If people want to see this person, they'll see it. If they think, that Dave Chappelle is too offensive or is transphobic or whatever he's being accused of, they'll be like, we don't want him. We don't want him. But the fact they're trying to shut him down is interesting. I don't think they're going to be successful, but it does exist. And I don't know. But can I say one quick thing? And I know I've been droning on. I apologize. In 1905, remember we were talking about the Marx Brothers doing ethnic characters?
Right.
In vaudeville, they used to do Irish comedians, Jewish comedians. Obviously, blackface was popular back then. Scottish. Catholics in Cleveland got upset and wrote letters and tried to stop Irish comedians from doing. They would, get in the outfit and look like a leprechaun and always be drunk and like looking for a pot of gold and all of that. And they're like, Jesus, we're trying to get going here in America. Every time I go to a vaudeville show, I feel like I'm being shamed because this stereotyping. So just so you know, protesting against comedians has been going on since 1905, at least, probably earlier. So this is not a new thing. It's just there's more power because they have Twitter, right, Alan, and stuff like that.
Well, let me say one thing too that I found in the feedback we used to get on our radio show is that you're talking about, let's say doing Irish jokes and Jewish jokes and whatnot. It's funny, we very rarely got a complaint because we didn't normally go over the line. We'd come close occasionally, but we'd get, somebody was offended by something and I'd go, yeah, but you weren't offended by the thing we did about this and that, another group of people where we would, do jokes, not offensive jokes, but just shtick about different kinds of folks. And people get mad about their particular person, but they're willing to laugh at the other ones, so it can be frustrating.
And jokes can be offensive, and sometimes jokes hurt people a lot of times. And if you ever saw my act, it's very friendly, very family friendly. But I love offensive comedians. There was a guy named Sam Kennison in the 80s, did extremely offensive material. I laughed a lot. But I like it as a fan of comedy. But real quickly, Gilda Radner, it's so funny. Alan Zweibel, who wrote a lot of her stuff for SNL, and I think we're doing a book event together in a couple of weeks. I can't wait. I mean, what a lovely, hilarious, talented lady. She's just incredible. Is her family still here? I think she has a brother or something.
I think her brother is still. I think he still lives here locally. Yeah. Alan Zweibel was part of the Jewish Book Fair a few years ago.
Yeah,
had the honor of introducing him, and he was wonderful. Talked about his incredibly close relationship with Gilda Radner.
Right. And somebody wanted to talk about Vaughn Meader, who put out The First Family, which was this monster comedy album, but not really stand-up album. More, they did sketches about President Kennedy. And unfortunately, after November 63, his career was like, they had to pull the album. It was just, the nightmare. I mean, that's not the worst thing that happened. We lost the president. But for that comedic act, that was just, that was really bad. Okay, we talk Alan Sherman and Weird Al are masters of parody, comedy, and song. Yeah. Well, I mean, again, not stand-ups, either one of them, but they do parody songs. And I have a special affection for Alan Sherman because there was a time in the early 60s where the United States of America was very Jew happy. They were fascinated by Judaism. Hava Nagila was a hit for, I can't think of the guy's name. And the 2,000-Year-Old Man comes out, and which would seem like a niche thing for people that would know, right, Alan? And then all of a sudden, we have a lot of Judaism is big, and Alan Sherman rode that crest so incredibly well. It was it was a real Jewish Renaissance time in the United States. Not so much today.
Let me throw one thing out at you from your book real quick.
Yeah.
I found fascinating again that ties history way back, the history of stand-up comedians and current comedians. But you called you talked about Steve Martin, and you called him the first rock star really of stand-ups in your book.
Correct.
And I'm reading this and I'm going, who influenced Steve Martin? And you threw out Wally Bogue.
Right.
Good Lord, who is Wally Bogue, and how did he influence the incredible Steve Martin?
Great. Yeah, Wally Bogue. If you ever went to Disneyland from 1955 till the early 80s, he would do 5 shows a day at something called the Golden Horseshoe Review. And remember we were talking about the different eras of comedians. There was the vaudeville. He was a nightclub comedian that toured the United States and England in the 40s and 50s, and then got this great gig. And he was just this eccentric dancer. He did jokes. He would, he would bring a kid up on stage, in Disney, and it was they were 5 or something. And he'd always do, "Are you married?" And the kid would go, "No." He goes, "I didn't think so. You look happy." Just those kind of jokes. So charismatic. Did balloon animals. Funny balloon animals. That was one of his great things. And it was just, you can still see him. I recommend YouTubing Wally Bogue Disneyland. There's a lot of footage of him.
Yeah.
But anyway, I don't know if you know this, Steve Martin's from Anaheim. He's from Orange County. So that was the first comedian he saw, and he called him his comedy hero. And he got a lot of his, Steve Martin was the opposite of George Carlin. This is slide 32. He was very silly and so he got all of that energy from Wally Bogue. You never know who you're going to influence. And he started playing arenas where they booked Led Zeppelin, who play the Nassau Coliseum. And I know you were just talking earlier about Sebastian is going to play a hockey arena there in Detroit, right?
Little Caesars Arena. It's unbelievable. Yeah.
Yeah. So that but he was the first one who were oh, this is not even in a vaudeville house. This is not even this is in the stadiums. Steve Martin. I don't know if anyone's old enough to remember. And then he quit stand-up as soon as he could, as soon as he got into movies. But as you can see, he's got an arrow through his head. He would do balloon animals, play the music, and sort of made fun of being a professional comedian.
Right.
It's just really exciting time in stand-up in the late 70s. Very exciting.
You do address, we talk about female comedians, and
yes,
in many respects, they've had obviously a tougher road to get to the top. And you threw out, is it Jean Carroll? I think.
Yeah, number 25. Yeah. She is a kind of a lost, and there's someone else I'd like to speak to about real quickly. She was sort of lost. Everyone was oh, the new comedians, Phyllis Diller and Toady Fields and Joan Rivers. But she preceded all of them and did a very straight stand-up jokes, nightclubs, and something called presentation houses. I know we're really getting into it now. But you can see she was at the Paramount. That's where Frank Sinatra got, played those big shows. That's where Martin and Lewis, big theaters that played movies and had a mini vaudeville show with it. And she used to be part of a comedy team with her husband. He went off to war. She started doing a single. She was great at doing these jokes, and then was on the Ed Sullivan Show more than any other female comedian ever. And then quit to become a mom and a homemaker, like classic 50s style. But she was still doing comedy in the early 60s. Jean Carroll's really important because she influenced Lily Tomlin from Detroit, Michigan.
Right.
Lily
was
used
she
to
an
watch
influence
her.
on Mrs. Maisel? Had she an influence on Mrs. Maisel and things like that?
Maisel. You can call it Maisel if you want.
Maisel, yeah.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, that's the weird thing is Jean Carroll's era is a little before Mrs. Maisel's, which is, and there's a question about Lenny Bruce we'll get to in a second, is a little more from the coffee houses in Greenwich Village in the early 60s. Jean Carroll was already getting ready to quit comedy when the Mrs. Maisel era begins.
And so somebody was asking you
Oh, yeah. And I also quickly wanted to talk about the great Elsie Janis, who did impressions and sang and did some jokes. She was the first comedian to perform for the troops overseas in 1919 during World War I to the doughboys over in Europe, 20 years before there was a USO. 20 years. Or maybe 1918. I'm not sure. So she is like a real trailblazer. So myself, I performed in Iraq and Afghanistan, but comedians, Bob Hope, all of 20 years before any of those tours, she was doing that. Incredible.
A couple things, and we're getting close to the amount of.
I know, guys. Thank you for the questions. I'm really enjoying this.
We might be able to go a few minutes over if we.
Okay, we're gonna go over. I don't want to push another.
I've been told a little bit if need be, but what was ironic, the pure coincidence here is on page 3 of your book.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm referring. Hang on just a moment.
While you're looking that up, I want to real quickly talk about Lenny Bruce from Long Island. He's obviously. Oh, I think we have a picture of him. Yes, we do. Okay, I think we have. That's number 22. He was the first one to really push language and subject matter, especially. And remember, we're talking about Dave Chappelle getting like pushed back from the Twitter mob and cancel culture. Well, he got even worse, was arrested by the police on stage in San Francisco, in Los Angeles.
I would think you would still
Chicago and in New York for using obscene language. Can you just imagine at an adult nightclub? No one was complaining about it. And the police are just like, show's over, folks. And they arrest him. And a lot of it, I think, if you're asking me, and you're not, but I'm going to answer it anyway. A lot of it was because he was making fun of the Catholic Church. And it was like a Jewish guy making fun of the Catholic Church. And this is just when this all happened during the Kennedy administration, all these arrests. So I think the Catholics were just like, come on, we finally have a president. We're trying to like get our foot in the door of respectability. And like our religion is now being mocked by this guy, Leonard Schneider, believe it or not, is his real name. So, really important guy for opening up the world. Him and Mort Saul in particular, opening up the world of like, oh, this is what stand-up can be. And the older comedians didn't like it.
Well,
there's a quote in my book about Jackie Gleason. He's like, who wants to talk to sociology in a nightclub? It makes no sense. There were a bunch of drunks.
I think Lenny Bruce and Mort Saul today would continue to do their act without apology. I don't think.
Okay, maybe.
I mean, I think there's a lot of people who are apologizing for what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think those two guys in particular, and George Carlin as well, would do their acts without apology today. Say what you will, but I can't imagine them altering what they did.
Right. I saw there was a comment. I just the JCC. Are those the only people listening? About Sophie Tucker, who did stand up and sang. She was like a blues shouter, but worked the big nightclubs, the Chez Paris, the Copa, the El Morocco, Ciro's. And you know what? Here's an interesting little thing about Sophie Tucker. She would sell her books and sign them after the show. So she's one of the first comedians to do what we call now merch, where you would make extra money. Remember you're talking about monetizing? She would monetize after the show. She'd sign her book and you could, so now after a lot of stand-up shows, I don't know if anyone's been to comedy clubs. A lot of times comedians are selling their, t-shirts and things like that. Sorry. And so she was the forerunner of that. Sophie Tucker, huge nightclub headliner, and started in vaudeville.
One clarification for you. The JCC, the comments coming in from JCC of Metro Detroit are actually independent people watching her.
Oh, they're texting the comments. Got it.
Yes.
Okay, my bad. Sorry, I didn't mean to attack the JCC. Did we ever find out?
Not just people gathered in the gym at the JCC.
Right. I asked George Carlin was arrested. Yes, he was. As was George Carlin famously in 1972 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. At the Summerfest, and then Richard Pryor was also arrested. But even before that, Mae West did a show called Sex in 1927, spent 10 days in jail. Mae West. So I know we're talking about cancel. That's like when the government is like, you can't say these words. So it's a little different than what's going on today, which is private citizens going, well, we don't appreciate what you're saying. Yeah. Okay, we can take Lenny's face off.
Before we do run out of time, I want to find out where.
This has been fun, guys. Thank you for the questions. This has been great. I love talking about this.
Well, I want to find out, are you currently, I know you're an adjunct professor at USC. Are you currently teaching, or is that off and on? What's that all about with you?
Well, I teach just on Mondays because the comedians usually work Thursday through Sunday, Wednesday through Sunday, sometimes just a weekend. So they were like, do you want to teach? I was like, well, I can't teach on a Friday because that will kill my schedule. That would be like, that's why Orthodox Jews have trouble doing stand-up, because they can't work Friday night, which is a huge night for stand-up. I just teach on Monday. So I try to keep it as limited as possible. But next year that might move to Monday and Wednesday. I don't know.
Are these in person, or can you take your course online?
It's all in person. It's all in person. Except during the pandemic, we did Zoom. But
how else can we hear and see you currently?
Oh, well, you can. I mean, I tour a little bit, and I am. I was just on the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon talking about this book, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And so that's it. But you can see me. I'm in the movie Legally Blonde. Now that you see my face, you may go, oh, he's in Step Brothers. He's the blind guy in that. On Community. I'm on Shameless. I have little parts in a lot of little things.
Can you just, someone just sent in, they said they saw 82-year-old Rich Little last weekend in Las Vegas. Yeah. Very funny.
Yeah.
He's one of my early
talented dude. He's from Canada, if I'm not mistaken. And
he's Canadian.
What a great, just an impressionist like that skill set is so valuable for comedians. Most comedians can do one or two, and he can do anybody. He's just incredible.
Couple things. Actually, it's sold out tonight. John Lovitz is in town at the Comedy Castle.
Yes. We're promoting other comics. I love it. Yeah.
Well, he sold out, but I know you'd want me, because I was mentioning earlier, I didn't quite get to it. Page 3, where you mentioned Rich Scheidner. Yeah. Right, who introduced you to Armitage, the comedian Artemis Ward.
Yeah. And Scheidner is like at the very end when I do the thank yous. I also mention him because he is part of my comedy brain trust, which is Rich, Cliff Nestroff, Katie Mears, a lot of other people, Stephen Morrison.
And he's appearing. He is appearing at the Comedy Castle tomorrow night.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of 6 degrees of separation going on
I
here.
love it. I wish I could do the Comedy Castle. Get Ridley to book me.
I will. I talked to him today. I'd be happy to set that up for a price.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it.
Listen.
Wait, Jackie Mason. Somebody said Jack.
Oh.
I just wrote an article for when he passed away for Vulture magazine about Mason. I met him numerous times. One of the greatest comeback stories in the history of show business. Remember, we were talking about some acts don't translate. So he was part of that Catskill comedians that were just like, oh, these are the old timers. You might see him in Broadway, Danny Rose or something like that, sitting around Carnegie Deli reminiscing. And that he, in 1986, he brings his act to Broadway and The World According to Me and ends up winning a special Tony Award. And basically toured with that show or versions of that show for the next 20 years. It was incredible. And especially because he had this, I can't get into the whole thing now, but Ed Sullivan live on the air thought that he had flipped him off.
Yeah, that's a story.
Yeah, so it's a famous story. And, I'm not saying the nicest guy, but what an act, man.
Well, what's amazing about him, and I think is underrated, is that, he's got the accent, he's got the whole quick delivery. I find him, just unbelievable. The World According to Me was one of the funniest albums I've ever heard. I got lucky enough to see the show in New York, but what amazed me about Jackie Mason is that, some people might not even find him, want to listen to him because of his affect or the way he delivered. He did a lot of great humor, timely humor, political humor, and a lot of modern day subjects, if you will. Yeah. And maybe not something people would think they'd get from a Jackie Mason, but that's what I thought, is he had solid material about current things going on.
Yeah, he was very topical, like right. Will Rogers style. Yeah. Here's another interesting thing, just because I don't know if only Jews are listening to that, but when he started out, his agents were like, you got to take elocution lessons. You can't talk like that on stage. No one's going to listen to you. And he's like, what are you, embarrassed? Are you embarrassed that I have this like shtetl, Lower East Side kind of accent? He was a rabbi for a while, believe it or not.
Yes.
And so he was like, no, I'm going to talk this way, and this is, and he made it work for him. Again, yeah. Remember we were talking earlier about the Alan Sherman wave and, Hava Nagila, Jackie Mason was part of that. Like, oh, a guy with an accent drenched in Yiddish was now accepted on late night on the Ed Sullivan Show.
Tell us, and again, we just have a couple minutes left, but tell us, because I'm fascinated with George Carlin, and you said a co-producer on a special coming up. I had the opportunity to interview documentary. Excuse me. I had a chance to interview his daughter a few years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's great.
Yeah, she's great. She had a fascinating book about her upbringing, which was pretty wild. And I'm wondering if you had a chance to talk to her. Is she part of that documentary that you're working on? And when
she's one of the executive producers of it. She's a key person. I don't think we could have done it without her.
Yeah, she's fascinating.
She also has the archive. I mean, I'm literally looking at George Carlin's diaries these days. I'm reading them.
That's fair.
So, and his date books and notes, and it's incredible. I can't believe how lucky I am to get to work on this thing. I'm just thrilled by that guy. Okay. Question. There was a question about the difference between a skill set between a stand-up and a comedic actor, which is something I do both of.
Right.
For me, acting is sort of letting go. Like you sort of just reacting to the scene, having the lines locked in your mind and just sort of reacting to that scene. Whereas stand-up, I'm in control of everything. So it's not a letting go process. It's more of there is a zen. It's kind of like, I don't know, surfing or riding a roller coaster without any hand. You're just like, you have to kind of go with what's happening and you have to be able to pivot at a moment's notice. If things aren't working, you're like, okay, I gotta do that. So one's about control, the other one's about no control.
And there's nothing more gratifying when you have to go to the no control factor and it works. I mean, the payoff, when you get the payoff.
You got it. I mean, you have to just trust that the scene is going well. That's when I was like, acting with Larry David. I'm just like, okay, I'm just hoping this goes well. There's nothing I can do.
Yeah. What was that experience like? I'd be remiss if not saying, because I watched that show and it looks like it's just fun to do, period. But to be a part of it had to be an incredible experience.
Oh, it was. I mean, I did the first season, so it wasn't really a big iconic thing at the time. But I play a reprehensible guy named Dean Weinstock, who is like this conniving lawyer, and he. So all I had in my mind was like, I am going to be the worst guy in the world, but with the friendliest tone, like complete. I guess it's called passive aggressive. So I was just like, is this your book? You know, we would find his book. It says a reward, like the whole thing. I can help you out. I love Julia Louis-Dreyfus. Like, so that was my whole, you can fix, I'll just send you a bill for the glasses. No big deal. How's your wife? So just a reprehensible person under the guise of a friendly dude. So it was, I loved working with them. And I have to say this, Larry, I used to do stand-up with him when he was finishing. I was just starting, and he would often, if he wasn't going well, he wasn't like me, he couldn't pivot. He would just like walk off the stage. And so when you're emceeing, I bring him up. Here he is from Fridays, Larry David. And he'd shake my hand and he would say, stay close. So in case he wanted to bail. So I'd go back up on stage and cover. So it was just, I love him so much. I can't believe he is as popular as he is and as funny as he is.
You know what?
Oh, wait, there's a bunch of other questions. Hold on.
Yeah.
Oh no, I see. I think I got them all.
Well, for folks and I highly recommend History of Stand-Up because it really gives you an incredible view from start to finish about the evolution. I kept thinking of the famous drawing of Evolution of Man, where you have the primate and the walking upright, and then the last guy could be the stand-up comedian at a microphone. Maybe they should add one to the human race. But
Alan, can I say thank you for walking me through this, and for help. The guy who was helping out on the slides and the whole thing. It was really fun hanging out. I wish I was in Detroit. That's the only thing. I just wish I was there with you guys because I love that city. But maybe I'll come back. I'll work the castle.
I'm going to put a good word in with you. I'll work out the same deal you were trying to work out with Larry David. You do something for him, and we'll see
exactly.
Get you into the comedy. I think you know what I'm saying.
Exactly. And thank you for all. I apologize for all the comments and questions that came in today. So.
Well, this is great. And, it's not a tell-all book where you're writing about stand-ups and what they're about. You just simply deliver the goods on the history of stand-up. And it's a fabulous read. And I've loved communicating with you both on and off, and we enjoy it. So I highly recommend it, and I wish you well. And please come see us in Detroit when we get our 6th or 7th shot.
Okay. All right.
I think that'll do it. Thank you very much. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, Wayne and Alan, for being with us and for such a delightful and fascinating discussion. And thank you to all of you at home for joining us. Our next event is Reports from a Haunted Past with Dara Horn tonight, Sunday, November 7th at 7 p.m. Remember to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and visit our website, culturalarts.jccdet/bookfair for our full schedule and ways to get involved. See you next time.